my character, my Little Miss History has a motto. If you don't know your history, you don't know what you're talking about. And I think that pretty much sums up my philosophy.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us. So today is episode 63, and I am talking to Barbara Mojica, who is an educator. Even though she's retired, she's still an educator, and she loves history. She's a writer. And you were just saying that you have 14, you're working on your 14th children's book. Is that right? In the
Right.
Little Miss History series. So that's right. Okay, good. So do you want to tell about your series? Because I love that idea. And even though I'm not a student of history, theater people do sort of have to do a lot of historical research. So, so I like history
In anything,
a lot.
right?
Right. Yeah. Right. So tell about your series.
Okay. Well, the series was born out of my two passions. I love history. I went to college and majored in history. I took a graduate history. But when I got out of college, I discovered that I really wanted to work with kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I started teaching. I began teaching in elementary school, and I did that for 23 years before I became acutely aware that there were so many children whose needs weren't being met in the traditional classroom. So I went back to school again, and I took degrees in special education. And I worked in special education. I went to work with the preschool children and became a principal and then a school administrator in New York City, working with preschool children and getting them the programs that they needed. So that's the trajectory of my career. But when I finally retired after approximately 40 years of teaching, and I started very young at age 20, I decided I still wanted to keep in touch with children, and I still loved my history. So I started writing history articles for a local news magazine, and I really wanted to do children's books. So I wanted to make them fun, interesting, insightful, but different. I wanted children to really, really learn and experience other dimensions that history falls over into, other disciplines. So my husband, who is an illustrator, and he's been drawing since the age of 5, said, well, why don't I develop a character to narrate your series, and that will make it a lot more fun and engage the reader. So he did that, and he made the character on a younger version of myself. And since he does a lot of cartoon work, he made her a cartoon-like character. So she has kind of big ears, and she has rose-colored glasses because she has an optimistic view of the world, oversized rose-colored glasses. She has pigtails because I wore pigtails when I was young. And she wears kind of a camping or hiking outfit.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do a lot of hiking in the mountains, and I love to be outdoors and travel. So that's where that came from. And then she wears these really gawky, oversized boots, and they're in memory of my father who had huge feet. So she's kind of a life portrait of me, and she's fun, and kids love her. So she narrates the series, and the series are different aspects of history. So some of them talk about people like presidents. Some of
Mm-hmm.
them talk about iconic places like Mount Rushmore, the Statue of Liberty,
Mm-hmm.
Ford's Theater. Some of them are more allied with nature and science. So I have a book on the La Brea tar pits,
Oh, yeah.
and I have one on Sequoia National Park, and I talk about the redwood trees and
Mm-hmm.
the early settlements, the people who went there, and how it developed over time. And then I have one on Tombstone, Arizona, which is very close to where you live. And that book talks about the Wild West, but it also explores the evolution of a mining town, the kind of
Mm-hmm.
people who lived there. There were lots of immigrants. There were lots of crazy characters. And
Mm-hmm.
I talk about, in all of my books, people that are sometimes famous, but sometimes forgotten. And I bring out to light a lot of the forgotten heroes of history, like Alonzo Swan, who worked on the Intrepid sea carrier during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he served with a Black infantry unit. And it took him 50 years to get the award that he deserved for his heroism. I talk about Anderson Ruffin Abbott, who was at Ford's Theater, and he was a Black surgeon who was courting the maid of Lincoln's wife, Mary.
Uh-huh.
And he was at the theater, and he was involved, in trying to care for Lincoln, and he remained a friend of the family for a long time. So there are all kinds of things like that. I talk about the secret room behind Mount Rushmore that very few people know about. And I talk about the animals. In my North Pole book, I talk about climate, I talk about the environment, I talk about wildlife that live there. I talk about the 8 countries that claim territory in the Arctic
Mm-hmm.
area. So
Mm-hmm.
children learn a little bit about geography, and they learn about the flags of the countries. I talk about the myth of how the whole story of Santa Claus began
Oh,
as
that's
a
great.
legend. I talk about the different names for Santa Claus, how
Mm-hmm.
he evolved and became important in advertising, like the Coca-Cola figure. So we go into all kinds of things. So we go into human rights, we go into Native Americans, we go into uh, African Americans. We talk about whether we were always right in history, and sometimes we made mistakes, and I point
Mm-hmm.
that out to children. I talk about how we had a treaty with the Lakota Sioux Indians, and how we took the land back after we told them we were going to give it to them, and do they think that's right? And now the Native Americans are building their own monument near Mount Rushmore, and it's going to be even bigger than Mount Rushmore. And do they think
Mm-hmm.
that we should have given the land back? Do they think that we should honor the two societies? What do they think about the new developments and so on? So it really is an open-ended series, and I'm trying to develop those critical thinking skills that are so
Ah,
important for
yes.
for everybody. Children, most importantly, to learn them at a young age, because critical thinking skills are something that has to be developed over time. It takes a lot of practice, and
Mm-hmm.
it's something that you need to do over and over again. And I think in our schools today, a lot of the how we need to think is ignored. It's more what we need to think and what we need to pass the test and get up to these standards that are kind of arbitrarily sometimes created.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think that's why I stopped teaching public school. I had a hard time fitting what I wanted to do in with the way you were supposed to teach it. So, yeah, I had difficulty with that.
Yeah, and that's becoming more and more of a problem because in teaching today, and it's been a few years since I'm retired now, because I started writing my books in the end of 2012, 2013. So I've been writing them for a while. But you spent more time doing paperwork, trying to prove that you were meeting all of these standards and deadlines and less time teaching. So, technology again can be a blessing and a curse. Now that we have the technology, everything needs to be measured and everything needs to be recorded.
Right.
So that takes time. That takes lots of time away from teaching.
Yeah. Well, I come from a family of lots of teachers. Not my parents, but my siblings and my husband's sister-in-law was a teacher. And so we have lots of teachers in our family. And yeah, it's the connection with the students to me was the most important part. The rest of it I did. I mean, I had to do the paperwork, but I kind of did it grudgingly because I wanted to connect. Part of my teaching career was I was teaching in Douglas, Arizona, which is on the southeastern corner of the state. It's a border town. And a lot of the students, went back and forth from Mexico to the United States. They lived in the United States, but they had lots of family in Mexico. And so, they'd go back and forth a lot. And I did have some students that actually lived in Mexico and came to Douglas to go to school, but not a whole lot of those. And, they just are so family oriented, so gregarious, so wanting, most of them just wanted to learn. So that was a joy to be in the classroom with them. But yeah, it's the paperwork stuff is what got me down. And now I'm teaching college and there's still paperwork stuff that you have to do.
There's always paperwork.
It's not as much, fortunately, but yes, yeah. The critical thinking thing I think is so important. And that was one thing that I tried to instill in my students, even though they were high school students, was you got to ask questions. To me, that was where part of the critical thinking started. If somebody says something, you have to ask questions about, well, why are they saying that? But that's part of my theater background is why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they saying what they're saying? So you have to look behind the curtain in a way at people's motivations and
right. And a big part of critical thinking is first you have to be able to focus on a problem. And it's so difficult to focus these days because everyone, including our children, are multitasking. They're doing so many things at once. And that inhibits the inability to focus. And parents need to model that, I think. Parents need to show children that sometimes you just have to focus on one important thing and finish a task before you begin another one. Again, that's another thing. We don't finish things. And parents have to set boundaries, and teachers too, of course, but set boundaries and be fair, but enforce the rules. A lot of parents are so busy, they're so overwhelmed, and they kind of give up and okay, clean your room. And if the child doesn't clean your room, well, it's easier to just clean it for them because they're never going to do it, and they don't learn responsibility
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, all of these things are important. In critical thinking, you have to focus. And history relies a lot on critical thinking. I mean, when you first talk about history, you say, okay, well, history is a story about people and places. But history is more than that. You need to know where you came from in order to understand where we are and where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And history is what really is the glue that keeps us together in our families. I mean, the moment we're born, we become a character in history, right? So
Mm-hmm.
our story begins, but we're already part of a bigger story. We're already part of a family unit that has had members before us and will have members after us. And
Mm-hmm.
we're part of communities. And what are communities? They're involved in the memories of people who are drawn together by a common culture and common goals. And
Mm-hmm.
then we live in this larger world. And in this larger world, uh, we have to understand how all of us got here and how all of us can work together. So history, and critical thinking forces us to observe and then to analyze things. Once
Right.
we make all of these observations, we have to do something with them. So we have to analyze them. And then that comes into, asking the questions
Right.
and making our own judgments, making opinions, but that all has to be based on real knowledge and,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the primary sources, what was happening at the time and who the people were, how they were connected to each other, and how they communicated with each other. And the way they communicated changes over time. Again, history evolves as our technology evolves.
Mm-hmm.
So people used to communicate in pictures before there was language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we developed language, they started to develop different speech patterns and different languages to communicate. And then we invented things. We had print first, and then
Mm-hmm.
we invented other things like the telegraph and the telephone, and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually we have computers. So now we're all linked worldwide. So all of that has changed the whole scenario. And the way we form conclusions today should be by looking at all of those things, but we don't all often do that
Mm-hmm.
because in the world today, everything is a snap judgment. We're very busy. So we get a piece of information, and again, how we get that information is important. Is it a
Mm-hmm.
real true fact? Is it just somebody's opinion? And social media is full of opinions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it has some fact, but then everybody has their way of interpreting it. And the way people interpret it is not necessarily truth. So we have to teach children the differences between fact and fiction. That's another really, really important line of thinking, because if if we don't expose children to different viewpoints, then they're only going to form their judgments by their immediate circle or the people that they happen to be in contact with, and not necessarily, those in different areas outside their own little circle. So
Right.
we have become, ironically, even though we're more connected than ever through communication and
Mm-hmm.
instant uh, response through the internet, we've divided ourselves into these little groups. We have put ourselves into categories according to those that we most associated with, and with those who with we share common opinions. So that's an enemy of critical thinking. Thinking, because we've been raised the same, because we've been raised a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
or we belong to a certain political group, or we just want to be socially accepted by a certain group. So we make ourselves fit in with that group. These are all, things that are really important for children to be able to differentiate. And if we don't think, we don't encourage them to think independently, they're going to become like, little social autonomans, addicted to their, what is somebody saying, and how, how can I be the most popular by fitting in with this certain group? Not necessarily what I think, but what I need to think in order to fit in.
So I saw that on your website that you do videos, training videos.
Yeah, I do teaching as well. I still, don't want to hang up my hat
Right.
as far as teaching goes. So especially during COVID, I wanted to extend little tidbits of teaching and knowledge. I didn't want to go into a formal lesson.
Right.
But what I did is I developed a YouTube channel on which I have some videos about subjects that my books cover, so I'll have related videos to a national park, to the Statue of Liberty, to Ellis Island, different books that I've written on. But I also have kids' history videos. So I have a whole series of videos where kids talk about history. And I have videos for authors. I have a few videos where I give author tips, little tidbits about my journey as an author, which is a whole other interesting experience and a whole other learning curve.
Really?
Then I have mini teaching videos. So I have videos that I call the 2-minute teacher, and they're approximately 2 to 3 minutes. And what I do is I take a subject, and it can be anything. It could be math, it could be reading, it could be science, it could be history. For instance, I have one on how to be a good citizen. So it's a very short video, and I have a worksheet that just gives a little introduction of what being a good citizen is. And then I have a follow-up worksheet that encourages an elementary school child to practice being a good citizen by writing, different choices, writing a letter to cheer somebody up when they're sick, or doing something to make your community better, like, going out and cleaning up the trash, or, whatever it could be, to just become a responsible citizen. I have things like graphic organizers, ways to make teaching easier, and writing exercises like writing a comic strip, or writing a letter to an editor in a newspaper and telling them what your opinion is, giving them like a 1-page summary of an issue, and then asking the student what he or she thinks about it, and then write a simple, like, 1-page letter to the editor and tell them what their opinion about something is. So, things like that, reading comprehension, extending vocabulary, math, doing little exercises about, again, critical thinking sometimes.
Right.
Using critical thinking and solving math problems. And in science, some fun experiments like, working with a filter, or, discovering different substances, liquids, solids, gases, how they react to different variables, and fun kind of things like that can easily be done, easily set up by a parent in the home, or they could be used as supplementary lessons in a classroom as well.
That's great. Oh man! So you didn't really retire?
No, I have a blog too, so I spend a lot of time on the blog. I have some of my tips,
Mhm.
tips for teachers, tips for parents. I talk about critical thinking, things like that. But I also review what I call family-friendly books. So
Oh,
I review books for toddlers, books for preschoolers, elementary school, middle school, even some young adult books, and I just review them and suggest different books. So like on my Pinterest board, I have listings of all of these things too. You know, uh, I have links to my lessons. I have links to book series and all kinds of resources for parents and teachers. So yeah, I'm very very busy.
And how often do you do your blog? Is it like every day or once a week or
Generally at least twice a week,
twice a week?
sometimes more than that.
That's
Sometimes
a lot, though.
it is a lot, but it it keeps me engaged and keeps my brain working, and I hope I'm doing some good
Oh,
by
yes.
sharing what I've come to learn over all of these years, and
Yes. Yeah,
trying to develop the future leaders of tomorrow. So
that's right. Exactly. Oh, wow. That's so exciting. I love that you retired, but you didn't really retire. You're just doing it in a way that you love to do it. You're tailoring it to your own personality and the way you want to teach instead of having to do, as we were talking about, all the paperwork stuff. And yeah, you don't have to do that. You're just engaging with people.
yeah, I think there should be a lot of options available to children. Personally, I believe that the money should follow the child in education rather than,
Mm.
just being allocated
Hmm.
to the district where you live. And, I have experience with my own children.
Hmm.
One of my children went to a school that at the time it was experimental, and it was kind of like the beginning of a charter school concept.
Mm.
It was a collaborative school where they did a lot of team teaching and hands-on cooperative learning. And the students were very involved. This particular school was a high school, but the
Hmm.
students were very involved, even in the sense of helping to hire new teachers. They had a little committee, and it would involve the principal, and it involved a parent, and it involved a student. So they actually participated in interviewing the applicants for new teachers.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, and it was a whole different type of concept, and for
Hmm.
some kids that worked. A
Hmm.
small school was great. For a highly competitive school is great for other students. I had another child who went to one of the very competitive, highly specialized entrance exam kind of schools, and for her that was good. But we need to have different options for
Hmm.
children.
Hmm. We do. Because some children don't thrive sitting in a desk for however many hours a day. You know, they just don't thrive that way. They need something else. They need more more movement, or they need time to think about what they've heard already. Because I don't think between, well, I'm speaking of high school. They go from class to class, and there's really no time to sit and just think about, wow, what the information they got in that one class. I'm like that. I need to sit and think about the information I've heard and sort through it and decide what I want to ask more questions about or what parts I don't agree with. So, yeah, different kinds of, I like that idea of different kinds of styles of learning for students.
Yeah, and I think the parents have to become more involved in that. They
Hmm.
have to really push for looking at what their child's needs are and then really seriously thinking how they're going to be met. There
Mhm.
doesn't have to be just one choice. There's
Mhm.
homeschooling, and then now there's some parents who get together and they have kind of like a cluster homeschool type of thing
Mhm.
where they have a group of, if they're not teaching themselves, they hire a group of teachers to
Mhm.
teach a whole group of students from different families. And then you have the charter schools, which emphasize
Mhm.
certain types of learning.
Mhm.
That if a child's musically inclined, there are some schools where they can study music at the same time, or if the child's artistically
Mhm.
inclined,
Mhm.
they can incorporate art into the curriculum. So, there are a lot of ways to do it. It's just that we have to be, well, we can't be lazy. We have to
Right.
really be proactive. And a lot of
That's right.
parents during COVID, they learned what was going on in their schools and they weren't very happy with it. And
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
they became aware of it, and now they're pushing back against the
Mhm.
things that they don't want their kids to
Mhm.
learn. So parents are the first teachers, and
That's right.
you know
Mhm.
they are the ones ultimately responsible for their child's education.
Yes. Well, I want to change the subject. It says on your Podmatch profile that you live in the Hudson Valley, and I read some books about that area, and I wanted to hear more about what what could I go if I went there, what could I go see, and what's the landscape like, and that kind of thing. So,
Okay. Well, I live in the upper Hudson Valley.
mhm,
So I live a little bit south of Albany, the capital.
mhm,
So I am about 140 miles north of New York City.
mhm, mhm,
And the land around here is, I kind of live on a plateau.
mhm.
And we have lots of mountain ranges. So we're
Oh, nice.
surrounded by mountains. And I am not very far from the Hudson River. So I like one of my leisure activities when I have some leisure, which isn't too often. In the summer, I like to go boating. And I like to sail on the Hudson River, and and the Hudson River is great because it hasn't really changed much, and you
Mhm,
can picture the way it looked when we first came
mhm, mhm.
to America. And I can sail to the spot where Henry Hudson got stuck on the mud flats, and the Native Americans came out and helped literally push him off. And I just am surrounded by history. I live close to Martin Van Buren's home,
Mm,
one of our presidents.
mhm.
I don't live far from the American Revolutionary battlefield of Saratoga, where the revolution turned.
Mhm.
I don't live all that far away from Washington's headquarters. A lot of the sites, so his headquarters at Newburgh, live a little, not that close, but within distance.
Mhm, mhm.
I live near FDR's summer home and museum
Oh,
in Hyde
yes.
Park, and in fact, I did write a book about that, and I
Mhm.
do a book signing there, usually at the holidays. Haven't been doing it with COVID, but
Right.
well, I actually go to the museum there and read to children and do a book signing there. So you could see almost anywhere you go. I can walk in the local village,
Mhm.
and I can walk through there. And the village was founded approximately 1665. You can see the waterfalls near where the old cotton mill was. You can see signs. They actually still have the signs as to what the buildings were. in the
Oh.
1800s. So there's a
Uh-huh.
sign for where the drugstore was, where the grocery store was.
Oh, cool.
All
Uh-huh.
of these things you can. There are historic markers everywhere. So marking old taverns, the first
Mhm.
schoolhouse. I don't live far from Claremont, where the first steamship sailed between
Oh.
New York City and Claremont. And the Livingston family actually provided a lot of the funding for that. And the original house was burned down during the Revolutionary War because the British burned it down because they were sympathizers of the
Mhm. Mhm.
revolutionaries. And Livingston, that in that family, he was one of the participants in the Declaration of Independence. So there are, just tons. You could go
Mhm.
see where Nathan Hale was hung. I mean, anywhere you go, there are hundreds and hundreds of historic markers for almost anything you can see. One of the first schoolhouses, just beautiful, beautiful scenery, mountains, valleys. It's just wonderful. It's a wonderful place for someone who loves history to live, for sure.
Well, yes. And you have water and mountains and hiking, and so you have it all kind of, it
And
sounds
the
like.
weather is, we have the typical 4-season weather,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you get a little bit of everything. And we've had a pretty mild winter this year. But I mean, there are times when we could get 2 or 3 feet of snow. Not, you
Mhm.
can, but it is just beautiful. And the fall, of course, the fall colors.
Oh, yes, I was going to say. Yeah, because we don't really get fall colors in Arizona.
No, no.
Well,
I was in Arizona in the fall when I did the research for my Tombstone book because
Mhm.
when my books are they are illustrated, but they're multimedia
Mhm.
because my husband and I when we take our own pictures for almost all the books,
Oh.
not the North Pole, of course, we didn't go there,
Mhm.
but we do our own photography and we incorporate real pictures with the portraits
Mhm.
and with the illustrations. So there are the illustrations of the character, there are portraits of important people in the
Mhm.
story,
Mhm.
and there are actual photographs,
Mhm.
of the places. So
Yeah, that's
it's a,
neat.
a multimedia
Mhm.
approach.
That's neat. Well, northern Arizona, I suppose they have colors because there are different kinds of trees in northern Arizona than there are down here in southern Arizona. But yes, mostly we don't have the fall colors. So, but we do have lots of history too. It's just not as well. The recorded history is not as old. I live in the valley where it's assumed that Coronado came through. We can see the Coronado National Monument from our house, and somebody just recently found in the valley on the other side, in the next county west of us, found some artifacts that she thinks were from Coronado. So he was all over this area, and that's in the 1500s, I think. So
Yep.
but
Hmm.
there's not a whole lot of written recorded history about that, like there is about where you live. So,
Well, yeah, we have wonderful museums. That's another thing.
mhm, mhm.
Fantastic museums.
So, do you have anything else you want to say before we go? Do you have any book recommendations? Well, your books are a big recommendation for parents, but do you have any other book recommendations maybe that you want to talk about?
Specific to a certain area or discipline, or uh, there
How
are
about historical book, maybe historical novels, something about history? Do you have any recommendations about historical books, either nonfiction or fiction, that might be interesting?
Well, yes, a couple of series come to mind. There's an author, Carol P. Roman, who does a whole series of books more about culture than history, although there's some
Mm-hmm.
history in them.
Mm-hmm.
She does books about if you lived in, got over 50 books, I think, about if you lived in, and then she takes a child and say,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you lived in this place, you might eat this kind of food, you might wear this kind of clothing, you might have these kind of customs, like you might go to these types of celebrations. So they're very interesting series, and it's Carol with an E, P. Roman, and all of her books are on Amazon. Uh, that's a good series for children. It, connected with
Mm-hmm.
history,
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. Do
and
you
there were
have
over 50.
over 50 of those?
Oh, so
Do,
almost any country you can imagine: China, Poland, you know,
anywhere.
uh, anywhere,
Wow.
Germany, the traditional European countries, and
Mm-hmm.
so on.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. What about for adults? Do you read books just for pleasure for yourself?
Yeah, I don't read many adult books these days because I'm
Mm-hmm.
spending most of my time reading children's books.
Mm-hmm.
But when I read adult books, I like kind of adventure thrillers like, Patterson and
Mm-hmm.
uh, Clive Cussler books.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the Gene Aul books, the
Yes.
Clan
Clan of the
books,
Cave Bear.
Cape
Uh-huh.
Bear, and the whole series. And
Uh-huh.
those are huge books. Like some people can't get through them because they're like 1,000 pages each. But I was fascinated by that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was an exceptional job of interweaving character studies with history. I mean, it just seemed you really were pulled into the characters and
Mm-hmm.
really, could imagine yourself there in that time and living in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a fantastic series. I've read a lot of the classics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did. When I was very young, I signed up for. They had one of these series, and I think it started. I think it came out in the 70s. They decided to do a series of American Pulitzer Prizes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you got kind of like the book of the month, and I wound up with like 50, books from like way back at the beginning, from the early
Wow.
1900s until
Uh-huh.
like near 1970. And I went through all of those. So, some of those are the classics like The Good Earth and
Mm-hmm.
Arrowsmith and
Mm-hmm.
uh, some of the Hemingway books, but some of them were not as well known,
Mm-hmm.
the ones way back. But I read all of those. I like reading pretty much anything except I'm not very much into fantasy kind of books,
Mm-hmm.
and not so much into science fiction. Maybe a little bit if it's
Mm-hmm.
tied in with other things, but I like books that involve people and
Mm-hmm.
places. And I love to travel. So,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as I was old enough to make any kind of money at all, I wanted to travel because growing up, my parents didn't have a lot of money and they didn't even have a car, so I didn't get to go a lot of places. But loving history, I was always interested in people and the places that they came from and,
Mm-hmm.
where they wanted to go. So I took myself pretty much all over the world. I've been to like 25 or 30 countries and, more than half the states. And I was a bit of an adventurer. I went to the Soviet Union when they first opened it up to tourism in the West. I think that was like 1974. And that was a very interesting experience to be. So I went behind the Iron Curtain and through Checkpoint Charlie and, into Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And it was Poland. It was a very eye-opening experience of how there's another world that lives totally different from you. And I went to China as well. I've been to communist China. And again, that was very eye-opening and totally different culture, totally different political mindset, but, very interesting to experience that. So I think anyone who has the opportunity to travel, should do so. And
definitely.
And today, if you can't travel, you can always, you can travel virtually.
That's right.
To a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit different, though. My husband and I took a trip circumnavigating the globe in 1996, and when we saw the Taj Mahal, it's just nothing like it's so much more than the pictures.
Yep, it is. It is, right.
So that's just one example. So much more than the pictures. Yeah. I think it's important to just be there in the atmosphere of the place that you want to visit.
Right. You can really experience, the feeling, I mean, you can imagine what it would be like to stand in a certain place, but you can't actually experience it unless you're there.
Right.
Whether it's something like the Grand Canyon or, or Niagara Falls, whether it's a physical place or whether it's some kind of emotion. Like I can remember one of the places that I really loved was the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And just being in that small, it's very small. I mean, I imagined it to be so much bigger, but just being in one place that had, of course, the statue of David, but the artwork in just a couple of rooms. I mean, so much history and talent. It's just incredible, and you couldn't never get that unless you were actually physically
there
in the place.
Right. Yes. My husband's an artist, so when we took our trip, we did stop at galleries, and the Van Gogh Museum was a highlight. But we also went to the Louvre, but they went on strike right after we bought our tickets. All the workers went on strike, so you could only go to certain exhibits in the Louvre. But there was one that we went to outside, I'm probably going to say the name wrong, Scheveningen in the Netherlands. And it was a 360-degree painting of the coastline and the town and the, and there was this big, beautiful hotel on the beach, and that was in the painting. It was just really, that was so interesting to just stand in the middle of this painting and just, turn yourself around.
Right. I love museums like that. I went to the Museum of the American Revolution for my Independence Whole book. And that museum is just incredible. I mean, you talk about different learning styles. I mean, you can experience so much. They have the 3D movie experience. They have, dioramas. They have the characters actually speaking to you. They have the sculptured characters, and then they have the video to go along with it, and then they have the hands-on where you can actually handle a rifle
Oh,
that
wow.
was used that, during that time. And
Uh-huh.
I mean, that is just wonderful for kids to experience, because no matter what their learning style,
Mhm.
they're going to get something out of
Mhm.
that they can take back and remember.
Mhm. Yes, right. Oh, this has been so much fun. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Well, I think my little Miss History, has a motto: if you don't know your history, you don't know what you're talking about. And I think that pretty much sums up my philosophy about why it's so important to know history, both
Yes.
for ourselves, for our community,
Mhm.
for the world.
Mhm. Yes. I love that motto. Yes. Because we're destined to repeat it if we don't take in what actually happened in
And it's
history.
so sad to say that history is very much neglected in our schools today, at least
Mhm.
especially at the elementary school level.
Oh,
And that's when
yeah.
children are sponges, and when they
Mhm.
really could absorb all of this. And like I said, developing the critical thinking skills that go along with that. That's when
Right.
they need to start developing them so they can practice them over time. and
Right.
and they're not getting it. And what do children want? They want the answers to those questions: the who, the what, the when, the
Mhm.
why, the how. And so much of that, I think, is being lost, and
Mhm. Mhm.
not being cultured. Let's just put it that way. Not
Mhm.
being developed. And
Well,
everybody's a character in history, so you can go out there and you can make your
that's
own history.
that's right. That's right. Yes. Yes. Well, I love your series. It's I'm going to be recommending it a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I have we have grand nieces and nephews that are now, one or they're still babies or about to be born. So one or two
Oh,
or three or four.
wonderful.
Yeah, so we'll be recommending the books to them.
No, it's funny that that's another thing I wanted to do with my books. I wanted them to kind of be able to grow with a child. So
Mm.
because they're picture books, I have fans, as young as 3 and 4. I have one little guy who uh, became enamored with my La Brea Tarplets book.
Mhm.
And he actually sent me a picture he cut out the tools for digging up the tar pits, and he got to visit. His parents took him on a trip to La
Oh,
Brea Tar Pits, and he sent me pictures of of
oh, that's so
of
great.
of himself standing in the museum and talking about the things that he had read in the book. So young children love the pictures, and as they get older, of course, they get more and more into the questions, and
Right.
being able to interpret it. So the books are really, when I go to schools, I do presentations from K to 6.
Uh-huh.
But the vocabulary is rich, and most of my books have a glossary to explain more difficult vocabulary words.
Mhm.
But they're really appropriate for middle school kids as well.
That's
So
cool. That's so great. I love it. Oh, Barbara, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been fun.
it's been great chatting with you, and I hope people will visit my website, littlemisshistory.com, and take take note of some of the things I have available, and a lot of them are free. So I hope that they will find some value in them.
That's great. Yes. Well, I will put up all of your social media outlets on the show notes. So, yeah, so people will be able to go and check it out.
And I love contacting. So if anybody wants to write to me, my contact is on my website. So
Mhm.
I love chatting or answering questions or being a resource if I can be a resource.
That's fantastic. Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to Podmatch, which I call a dating service for podcasters. Since I joined their platform, I have met so many wonderful people from all over the world, and they make the matches so easy that if you are a podcaster or you have a message that you want to share, you might want to consider checking them out. The affiliate link is at the bottom of my show notes on my website at sagewomanchronicles@sagewoman.life. Part of what I love about them is that they promote civil conversations, and can't we use that right now? So if you check them out, tell them Lucinda sent you. I'd also like to invite you to my Patreon community, where we will have chats with authors or creators. We'll have member chats about the stories that they love, and occasionally we'll have extra episodes or uncut episodes of Story Power. So please go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/storypower without the hyphen, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.